What's up and welcome to another episode of Gizmo Slip Tech. Today we're taking a look at Cyberpunk 2077 and whether it's worth turning on RTX. We'll also be taking a look at how it affects your frame rates. Now I've got lots of examples of turning RTX on and off, indoor scenes, outdoor scenes, but before we dive into those, I gotta give a big shout out to our sponsor for this episode, Newegg. They provided the RTX 3080 desktop that I did these tests on. Now Newegg has no control over the content of this video, so this is my complete and honest opinion, but there is a link in the video description down below to the 3080 desktop. Now I'll have my full review of the desktop coming up soon, but just know that it is generally very positive and I'm pretty impressed with this machine overall. So there is a link in the description down below if you want to support Newegg for supporting my channel, which I much appreciate. Now real quickly, let's explain what RTX is and DLSS, because you're going to need both settings on if you want the game to run smoothly. RTX is real-time ray tracing, which basically makes the shadowing and lighting in the game based on real-ish movement of light around the scene. Now on the other hand, DLSS is deep learning super sampling. DLSS takes a small image and upscales it and then utilizes AI deep learning to predict what the pixels should be as you upscale it to a higher resolution. So basically DLSS fakes ultra high resolution like 4K or 1440p, enabling you to have much higher frame rates while reducing significantly the load on the GPU and thus boosting your frame rates dramatically, which is the awesome part of DLSS. You basically get much higher frame rates with minimal to no image degradation at the quality setting, and then as you reduce it from balance down to performance or ultra performance, you're going to see more artifacts and less overall rendered resolution and more prediction from the AI. And so therefore I would say you probably don't want to go below performance or balance. On ultra performance, it's really designed for 8K upscaling and not so much 4K or 1440p or even 1080p. If you want to know when to turn on DLSS and what setting to set that to, you'll have to check my other Cyberpunk performance and analysis desktop versus laptop video, which I'll have linked at the end of this one. Now without further ado, let's dive into these examples. Alright, so here's our first screenshot to compare. We've got RTX turned on Psycho here and the initial image. Now here are three images side by side. We have RTX completely off on the left, RTX on Ultra in the middle, and RTX on Psycho on the right side. So what are the differences between these images? We've got some reflections coming off the car that are arguably more realistic than when we have RTX off. In addition, we have the lights streaking in the puddle, I think maybe just a little bit more realistically, at least for sure more dramatically. And finally, when we look at the puddle itself, we have an actual reflection from the skyline that accurately reflects what those buildings look like. That's the kind of fine detail that RTX provides that you might not really notice at first glance, but is still there. Overall, the differences in this image, I would say RTX is not that noticeable. Okay, next up we have a bar scene with rather dramatic LED lighting. Let's go ahead and take a look and see if we can notice any differences between these two images. This is an example where I would say turning on RTX is probably not worth it. If you notice a difference that I missed, point it out in the comments down below, because I don't see any difference in the lighting here at all. Next, we have an outdoor scene with dramatic lighting. And I gotta say, I don't really notice much of a difference at all here. I mean, the glare coming off of the car looks the same. The lighting, the shadowing everywhere, as far as I can tell, looks the same. Maybe the lighting and the shadowing in the rafters, there's a slight difference. Yes, the shadowing in the rafters. If you look at the roof here, we can see some additional highlighting. Now, this is a scene where RTX shadowing is very, very prominent. This is not the case for all of them. When we have RTX off, it's almost like the whole scene has a global illumination level that's just maybe turned up a little too high. But when we enable RTX, a lot of the shadowy elements of the world kind of fade away, and the brighter elements of the world are more noticed by the eye. And I think this is especially evident in the facial expressions of the character, as well as the glare that you get off the side of his little thing at the top of his head there. Taking a look at a moving version of this image, over here right along the edge of the door handle here, we get a lot of very realistic reflections through RTX being enabled that you just don't get with the rasterized version of shadowing that just tries to fake it but doesn't quite do it as well. Now overall, it's almost like the non-RTX version just doesn't have the same depth to the image that the RTX version does have. And I think in a game like Cyberpunk, where you have a lot of very dimly lit scenes and very crazy colors and LEDs and lights, the depth of the image is actually a very important aspect of enjoying the game visually speaking. And I think this scene probably shows off RTX's potential better than almost any other scene. It makes the scene so much more dynamically vibrant while at the same time increasing the realism of the scene. And that is not always true for a lot of the scenes in Cyberpunk, but this is one. 2 giant thumbs up for RTX in my book. If you look at the specifics of his jacket, you can see that his jacket with RTX off kind of has like this global illumination level where you can just see kind of detail everywhere along the jacket. But when RTX is enabled, there are parts of the jacket that are more visible than other parts, and that blending of the light source really, I think, adds to the realism of the scene. Next up, we have some outdoor scenes shot at 1440p. This is surveying some wreckage that's on fire, and I gotta say it was very difficult for me to notice much difference at all here, but the main differences, I think, come down to her clothing. You can see some deeper shadowing around the character in the screen as well as the body laying on the ground, especially the deeper shadows right along the edges of the body here. It just looks more realistic. And I think the biggest thing I notice on this scene is the shadowing around the character's jawline is just darker and deeper when you have RTX enabled. And then also when you have RTX disabled, you have this level of global illumination again on the character model. Like if they just had more dynamic darkness applied to the character models, maybe you'd be able to fake having RTX disabled more easily, but I think that's one of the biggest indicators that RTX works. You just have brighter sunlight patches and then dark shadows, and that adds a lot to the visual dynamic of the game. The other thing I noticed is that the gun model has shadows when you enable RTX, but it does not with RTX off, or at least the shadows don't look as realistic when RTX is off. Next up, we have a scene in the city here. It's like a little cafe stand and some people walking around. Now, the main differences I noticed in this image is the reflections off of the sidewalk for both the stand here as well as some of the lights, like the yellow lights up here as well as along the vending machine. You can see these reflected very clearly when RTX is enabled, but as soon as you disable RTX, that detail is lost. So now that we've established that yes, RTX does make a visual difference, and no, it's not massive, but it is kind of massive in some scenes, in some areas of the game. You'll notice it much more than others. In other areas, you just literally almost cannot tell at all whether RTX is enabled or not. That said, how does RTX affect frame rates and performance? Okay, taking a look at these benchmarks, you can see that when we're running 4K, RTX off, DLSS off, we got 41 frames per second. We enable DLSS to quality, we only get an increase of 4 FPS. We enable RTX, that drops down to 37, so we're giving up about 8 frames per second to enable that RTX. But the good news here is if we turn DLSS up to Ultra Performance, we jump up to 82 FPS. That's exactly double what you get without DLSS. And when we turn on RTX to Ultra, we only lose 7 FPS, which is a much smaller loss overall. And I think that goes to show how utilizing DLSS allows us to turn on RTX without severely hindering our frame rate. And I think that shows how we can realistically attain playable frame rates while using RTX simply by turning on DLSS, and the combination of DLSS and RTX being enabled really does, I think, provide a enhanced visual experience overall when playing Cyberpunk 2077. So what that tells me is that if you want to turn RTX on, you definitely want to turn DLSS on at the same time, because DLSS seems to pair with RTX and reduce the load that RTX takes out on the machine. So in summary, if you have a non-RTX card, is it worth buying an RTX card just so you can play Cyberpunk with RTX enabled? Probably not, in my opinion. That said, if you're looking for an upgrade and you also want to turn on RTX, RTX is a cool and actually, I think, meaningful feature in Cyberpunk because it does enhance the visual experience significantly enough that it is noticeable. Like, especially in the car scene with Padre, I think that's the best argument that, hey, this is a giant visual difference between having it off and on. That said, there are lots of other areas of the game where you take screenshots and there's like no difference at all. So if you're on a budget, play the game without RTX and you're gonna freaking love it. That said, if you are gonna get an RTX card, you're also gonna be getting DLSS, which can really enhance the performance and image quality experience that you have in the game anyway. So in my mind, I think DLSS is actually the bigger feature than RTX, but the true benefit of getting an RTX card is not RTX or DLSS, it's really how they combine together to enhance the overall quality of the image as well as boost the frame rate enough while at the same time having a high resolution and making it playable still. That's just, it's the whole package, I guess. And again, big shout out and thank you to Newegg for sponsoring this episode. Again, there's a link in the description down below to the RTX 3080 desktop if you want to check it out. I know that RTX 3080s tend to be sold out like crazy right now, but the RTX 3080 desktop from ABS was actually in stock when I made this video, or at least was a couple days ago. Stock will vary obviously, but it might be a way for you to get an RTX 3080 when the actual GPU itself is sold out. If you found this video helpful, hit that like button, and if you want to see more of my tech videos, hit that subscribe button and smack the notification bell. I'll see you in the next one. Brandon out. Huzzah.